Can you hear me in the back? Oops. Okay. All right, thank you. You're from all 50 states, I understand, Ethiopia, Australia, Pakistan. So you're pretty well distributed, just in the U.S. And you're probably pretty used to people in our age group sort of talking as if you're young and need to have a special tone of voice and simple words and phrases. We don't do that. We've introduced young people to major responsibilities in the past. Juniors and seniors have investigated nursing homes, produced a book, testified for Congress, went on the national media, helped reform nursing homes back in the 70s. We have many examples of that. So just assume you're in your 20s and 30s and we'll make some important points. I assume you're here because you view yourself as future leaders. I suggest that you view yourself as present leaders. There's no time to waste. And as the students at the Parkland, Florida have shown, they're not waiting for anybody. They're actually organizing college students. And you got about, if you're lucky, 20,000 days of active life. You want to make the most of it. It goes very quickly. You don't want to lose your 20s trying to figure out what happened to your teenage years. You want to become leaders, and I assume that's why you're here. You're not going to spend 5-6 hours a day looking at your cell phone and sending trivial text messages by the dozens. That you are seeing the fate of the planet, state of the world, our generation passing it on to you in not very good shape. Although we brag about it, it's because we have advanced science and technology. But when it comes to poverty, when it comes to planet degradation, climate disruption, soil erosion, contaminated water, ocean deoxygenation, and many other situations, we are at the worst point in the long history of the planet. As you know from your own studies, fisheries, ocean fisheries have declined precipitously. Now farm-raised fish have exceeded the amount of fish from the oceans in terms of consumption in the world. The equatorial forests are shrinking, and all this should motivate you, not depress you. The first personality aspect of a citizen advocate is never be discouraged. Your best teacher is your last mistake, and become very resilient, keep up to date. If one strategy doesn't work, you think of another. If one tactic doesn't work, you think of another. You share credit with your friends who are working with you. You don't hog monopolize the credit. Those are all what you can consider a civic personality. It's not just what you know. It's not even the fire in your belly, the emotional intelligence. You need both. What's in your head and what's in your fire in your belly. But it's whether you have the requisite personality. When you look at the great citizen leaders in our history, they had a civic personality. That's the only way they could define leadership. They don't define leadership as just leaders. The function of leaders is to produce more leaders, not to produce more followers. Readers think, thinkers read. You're into the environmental issue. How many of you have ever heard of Barry Commoner? You can hear, right? So I want to just give you a little test on your knowledge of environmental leaders. And I asked you, any of you ever heard of Professor Barry Commoner? Okay, just a handful. How about David Brower? Okay. And how about David Freeman? It's not bad, but it's a long way from where you should be. Because, as you know, if you don't know what your predecessors did, you won't be able to stand on their shoulders and do more than they did. So as I said, you've got about 20,000 days of activity before you retire, if you're lucky. And you have to develop a public philosophy. You don't just go from month to month, week to week. You'll find your 20s will go very quickly. And it's good to know what you would like to do. Now, most of you want to make a good living, raise a family. That's your private lives. But in your public citizen lives, you often don't think enough about it. And so you're here to experience some of what you would be doing and some of what you want to be undoing. It's not just what you're doing, but what things you're going to roll back that are pretty destructive of our air, water, food supply, soil, and the rest of it. So we need to have a new generation of language. It's not enough to talk about pollution or contamination. They're not strong enough. Pollution is really a cumulative form of violence. Environmental pollution is violence to property, it's violence to the ecology, it's violence to human beings, it's violence to genetic inheritance, it's violence to animals, it's violence. It's not like an artillery shell or a missile hitting the target. It is a cumulative form of violence. In that sense, it's very insidious because it doesn't immediately alert you. If you're exposed to radiation, unless you get a huge blast of it, you don't feel anything for a while. And you're constantly exposed to it, and the cancer cells are building up. And so it isn't like a fire where you know exactly what you want to do. You want to try to put it out or run away from it. It's a silent, cumulative type of violence. And we got to get that across to people who tend to think that, if they're not being pinched, they're not being hurt. And that's why we need a whole series of new words and phrases, some macro, some micro, to describe this. Secondly, is you have to understand corporate power. If you don't understand global corporations and what they're up to, and their immunities, privileges, their excessive power over government, over the media, you won't know what you're really going to have to challenge. You'll be looking at symptoms. You'll be looking at the edges. You won't be going to the sources and the causes. These large corporations have one priority, and that's to make money. And that means profits, more sales, more bonuses to the executives, and make more money and more money. Now, when you're given that much power, you better operate in a society that limits that power, because it's just one value system. They're not interested as a priority in making more safety and more health. They have to be regulated. They have to be pushed by institutional investors like Fidelity and Vanguard. They have to be sued in court. All the things that we did in the 60s and 70s weren't achieved by simply begging them. A lot of times they're totally clueless. They were using our air, water, and soil as their private sewers, dumping all their waste and all their chemicals where people live. Animals don't do that. Regular animals, they don't soil their nest. But General Motors, Exxon Mobil, the copper companies, the iron ore companies, the chemical companies, DuPont, Dow Chemical, they were basically just dumping it in. They weren't testing the effects. People get cancer, they say, oh, you can't prove it. That's what, 8 years, 10, 15 years ago? Where's your evidence? You can't prove it. Again, you see the silent, quiet, invisible form of cumulative violence. So you have to learn about the power of these corporations. And there's plenty of good books to learn about it. I'm going to give you a number of sources, and in order to save you from having to write them down, if you go to our website, nader.org, you will be able to get the connections and the links. And the first one is corporate crime. You don't hear that. You hear street crime. You don't hear corporate crime. Well, most societies have different styles of violence that they pay attention to and styles of violence they don't pay attention to. So we have about 14,000 homicides in this country a year, and the evening news and the newspapers pay a lot of attention to those tragedies. What they don't pay very much attention to is the 60,000 people who die in this country from workplace-related diseases and trauma. 60,000. Compare that with 14,000. Preventable. The key thing is preventability, not whether it was intent or negligence or what have you. That's important for other purposes. But for our purposes, 65,000 people die, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, from air pollution, a lot of it from coal burning. That's over 1,000 a week. You have many, many thousands of people dying from things like herbicide contamination, pesticide contamination. You have auto safety crashes that can be prevented with safer motor vehicles, although motor vehicles are a lot safer than when I was your age by a long shot. We didn't have seat belts or airbags or padded dash panels or collapsible steering columns or rollover protection. So you want to think about corporate crime, and the source there is the Corporate Crime Reporter and a lot of corporate crime books that have come out. If you go to nader.org, you get some of the references. The second thing I want to talk to you about is automotive emissions. They're a lot less than they were years ago, but you can get information on nader.org. The Center for Auto Safety will give you information. On ocean problems, we have a group called Blue Frontier. Just had a March for the Oceans, which you want to participate in. It's going to be every year in this country and around the world, sometime in June, called March for the Oceans, and that also is on the website nader.org. In terms of wrongful injury and diseases, there's a body of law in our country called the Law of Torts. How many of you have ever heard of the Law of Torts? You should learn that in high school. Don't ever say your teachers, oh, you'll learn that in college, you'll learn that in law school, you'll learn that in medical school. No, you're perfectly capable of learning it in high school. The elementary principles of the Law of Torts. That's the law of wrongful injury. And going back to medieval England, which helps get us underway with trial by jury in open court, somebody injures you wrongfully, whether it's a street crime or a sexual assault or a chemical exposure or a defective product, you have a remedy. Go to a contingent fee lawyer and file a case in court to get damages, to publicize the defects so other people can be alert to it, and to deter other companies from doing the same negligent or criminal thing. So you can get that information. We actually have a tort museum in Connecticut. Anybody here from Connecticut? From Massachusetts? Yep. It's right in Winston, Connecticut. Go to tortmuseum.org and you'll see people go through it. They're fascinated. They say, why haven't we learned about this? Why haven't you learned about it? It's because there's too much corporate power over our educational system. Why wouldn't you learn about it? Thomas Jefferson was proud of it. James Madison was proud of it. It was the second objection in the list to King George III by the Patriots, saying, don't you dare take away our trial by jury. Why wouldn't you learn about it if we had a free education? We weren't worried about all these commercial interests trying to engage what you read, what you don't read, what course you have, what course you don't have. So you shouldn't stand for that. You can go all the way back to our revolution. That's a pretty good argument for any teachers who don't want to expose you to these important rights and remedies that you have. What's interesting is when we started out here, I lost a lot of friends in high school. They were killed or rendered paraplegic. In those days, quadriplegic, they never survived. They do now, but they never did. And in college, some of my classmates never came back. Spring vacation, they were killed in car crashes. The risk of dying in a car crash is 6 times what it is today. Things are a lot better today for all the things you know. They're in the cars now to protect you in a crash, and the brakes and tires are better, handling's better than they were in those days, where style prevailed over safety, horsepower prevailed over safety. And so I decided to do something about it. I really got angry, and I studied up on it, and I wrote a paper in law school on unsafe automobiles and a lack of legal protections, legal standards, turned it into a book on safety and speed. General Motors got wind of me, hired private detectives to follow me everywhere, to get dirt on me. Turns out they stumbled in the Congress. It was a violation to try to intimidate a congressional witness, and they followed me in Congress, and they mistook me for a Washington Post reporter, which is not a very good idea. And so the Washington Post wrote it up. We had congressional hearings, and we got, in just a matter of a few months, federal regulation for the motor vehicle industry, and signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson. So I looked at that and I said, gee, this is easier than I thought. What else is there? And so we helped mobilize people around the country to get the major environmental legislation through. And this motor vehicle law, by the way, also involved in requiring improved fuel efficiency, which would, of course, reduce air pollution from motor vehicles. And what we learned in the 70s is that if you have a sprinkling of people in congressional districts, people who are serious, people who mobilize their friends and neighbors, connect with their members of Congress, get some press, and represent public opinion, even though most people were pretty passive, but they really did want to protect their children and cars, and they did want to breathe clean air and drink clean water, and they got it done. They didn't sit around, trying to figure out why things couldn't happen. And a lot of these laws still operate today, and there haven't been many good laws in about 30, 35 years, because the corporations counterattacked. They built up their lobbyists here. They put a lot of political action committee money in campaigns. They started to change the complexion of the Congress. However, we did look at it this way. The most powerful branch of Congress is the Congress, of the government is the Congress. Just look up in the Constitution. It's the smallest branch, but it's the most powerful. It's only 535 people. They want your votes. They want money, but they want money to get votes. So if you organize your votes against that money, you can win. And just yesterday in Queens, in New York City, some of you know what happened. A 10-term congressman, Joe Crowley, spent 10 times what a 28-year-old young woman, Puerto Rican ancestry, spent, and she beat him 57-42 in the primary because she went door to door. She went to the neighborhood. She had a better message than he did. So organizing votes is a way to neutralize some of the big money in politics. So we shouldn't say, oh, big money, we don't have big money, we can't do anything. That's a feeling of futility and resignation. And this little book, I had it at 140 pages. That was the number of Twitter characters then. It's 140 pages, and it answers the question, how do you break through power in a democracy? And it's easier than we think. It gives a lot of examples, some of them by people not much older than you, in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, all the way to the present time. One of the things we got through was the Drinking Water Safety Act, 1974. We got through some bills to control chemicals and bills to restrain the severity of toxicity of pesticides and their use. And the question is, how do you get them enforced? And you only get them enforced by eternal vigilance back home and supporting environmental groups for lawsuits and lobbying state and federal legislatures. Now, we have something quite important I want to convey to you in terms of what you can do. There's so many things you can do. Your head will grow dizzy. So here are just a few. Number one, you should understand that because of your age and you don't have an axe to grind, you have huge moral authority over adults, grown-ups, huge moral authority. It beats me why 12 and 13-year-olds would never write President Bush and President Obama and say, we understand that you invaded Iraq and you're fighting in Iraq and you didn't have a declaration of war from Congress as the Constitution requires, and it's going to cost a couple $1 trillion, according to a Nobel Prize winner, Joseph Stiglitz. Why are you passing the bill on to us? Why don't you pay for it yourself by raising your taxes? That's what all people used to do in our country. You have a war, you raise your taxes. But what our generation did, we have all these wars, we didn't raise the taxes. We handed it off to you. See, you're right to be pretty upset, and you ought to call us up on that. and call us to account. And you do it with open letters. You do it with petitions on the internet. You can shame the older generation. Is this the kind of world you want to lead, with climate disruptions and all kinds of violent storms and rising sea levels and inundated coastal lines, and who knows what kind of contagious diseases will be enhanced by the climate change, like malaria and so on? So use the open letter and take us to task. You have great moral authority. When those students in Parkland went and met the tight-lipped legislators in Tallahassee, who are all, for the NRA and against gun control, they looked them straight in the eye. And let me tell you, a lot of those legislators blushed. They couldn't face them. And it wasn't because the students had a lot of money to give them for their campaigns. It was what they went through and their moral authority and the cogency of their arguments. So don't ever think you got to wait till you're 20, 25. You don't have to wait. You have maximum moral authority right now. And you got plenty of examples. There was a fifth grader who came to a class in Salt Lake City a number of years ago, and she said to her teacher and her classmates, I've discovered a waste dump a few blocks away. And the teacher said, no way. What do you mean a waste dump? And so she led them to this block, city block, and it was full of shrubbery. And indeed, it covered a waste dump. So the teacher said, well, look how motivated these kids are. Let's have a project. And they studied it. They publicized it. They met the mayor, city council. They got it cleaned up. Then they were testifying before the state legislature on a Superfund bill. Think how motivated they were. They were 10 years old. And nobody said, oh, you're too young to understand. You can't do it. You can become citizen scientists. How many of you are familiar with the citizen science movement? Well, there are all kinds of wonderful websites, and you can become counters of certain kinds of wildlife, birds, all kinds of exciting work where you work with full-time scientists and get a leg up for an internship, for example, or a fellowship. You can join an existing environmental group. All these environmental groups, they want members. Sierra Club, Friends of the Air Defense Fund, Natural Resources Defense Council, Audubon Society. So you get an early start, and you start getting their materials, their projects, their agendas, their conferences, so on. You can also do what, how many of you have ever heard of Felix Thinkbinder? It's unbelievable, isn't it? Listen to this. He's a German 9-year-old. He's now 20. And he read about this woman in Kenya who got the Nobel Prize for trying to preserve forests. And he's really motivated by her. And he suddenly announced that he was going to put forces into motion around the world to plant 1 billion trees. 1 billion with a B. And the grown-up said, that's a nice little bush, Felix. What else do you want to do? Well, he not only did it, he's now pushing forces in motion. He meets the Prince of Monaco. He goes all over the world. He's got groups planting trees. He's planted billions of trees because of his effort. His latest goal is 1 trillion trees. And you know how important that is for climate change. 1 trillion trees. So somebody asked him in Southern California when he was visiting, well, how many trees does the whole planet have? He said, I have no idea. So the Yale School of Forestry came out with an estimate of 3 trillion trees. He started out with nothing. He was a 9-year-old child with a dream. Why aren't we getting mass media exposure? Why isn't everybody in this room aware of what Felix is doing? Because we don't have a free media. With few exceptions, we have a commercial media, and the internet has been too trivialized. Look him up, Felix Thinkbinder. He's getting an undergraduate degree now in London, and he's going to Switzerland for an advanced degree. I just interviewed him on my Ralph Nader radio show. He's very calm, very modest, doesn't brag, very methodical, has everything, likes to know how things are going around the world. He's got a great network. So here's someone who started with nothing. He didn't have any connections. He didn't have any money. He had a mission, he had a passion, and he had know-how. And there are thousands of objectives waiting for you to grab hold of, like the one that Felix has grabbed hold of. How many of you heard of the Children's Express? Okay, that closed down around 1998. It was started by a former Wall Street broker who wanted to do something meaningful in life, and he brought together 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds, and they put out a newspaper, especially during the Republican and Democratic national conventions, the presidential conventions. And they got on national TV. They got a scoop here and there because they were prowling all over the conventions, and they found who was going to be the vice president once before the other press. And pretty soon they were spreading around the world. A chapter in Tokyo, chapter in Europe, and they became very proficient journalists before they even got to college. Again, that's an example. Now, one thing you have to think of is you have to increase your demand level. You have to increase your expectation level. Don't take no for an answer. You've heard that before. But how many of you read in your books about Eugene Debs, a great labor leader? You probably read more about him. He passed away in the 1920s. He was so popular, he would go by train from Philadelphia to Chicago, and there'd be 150,000 workers in a field waiting to hear him speak. He was a big champion of railroad workers, in particular. Ran for president several times. Woodrow Wilson put him in jail because he opposed verbally World War I. How about that? Lack of free speech. And even in jail, he got 1 million votes, equivalent to, say, 3.5 million votes today for president. Well, near the end of his life, he was asked by a reporter, Mr. Debs, what's your major regret? And he looked at the reporter and he said, my major regret? I'll tell you my major regret. That the American people, under their Constitution, can have almost anything they want, except it seems they don't want much of anything at all. Never forget that. He was saying they have too low expectations. We shouldn't have any poverty in this country. Why should we have poverty in this country? Productivity per worker has increased 25-fold since 1900. Where's it going? Where's it going? Why isn't it going to the workers? Why do 30 million workers make less today in inflation-adjusted wages than they made in 1968? Because they're not organizing. They're not demanding. They're taking it in the gut and taking it on the chin. You don't want to grow up that way. You don't want to be officious and nasty and arrogant. You just want to be very methodically. We should not have these problems. We got all kinds of science, technology, and wealth. We should not have these problems. We should not have to burn oil, gas, coal, and build nuclear plants and nuclear waste for hundreds of thousands of years. We should have solar energy, solar thermal, solar voltaic, wind power, geothermal, passive solar architecture. This has been proposed for decades. The ancient Persians and Greeks millennia ago had used wind power. They used passive solar architecture. But intermediate, the coal, gas, oil barons took over, and they steered the country into burning hydrocarbons. So you got to get the historical perspective. That's why you not have to read about what David Freeman is writing about at age 92. An engineer and lawyer, knows more about electricity production and energy than anybody in the country. He ran the Tennessee Valley Authority and 3 other giant utilities and was the advisor to presidents. You don't see him on the media, but he's written. You can look him up on the internet, David Freeman. Look at David Brower. He started one environmental group after another. When he became too tough, they threw him out. And the board of directors threw him out. He started a new one. And his latest one is Earth Island in Berkeley. Got its own nice building with renewable energy. Very good journal. You got to get motivation from these kind of very persistent, brilliant civic advocates. The other demand is, why don't you have your own program on national TV and national radio? There are over 600 cable stations. How much idiocy and foolishness are going to fill these stations? Turn them on if you can hold your stomach. They're franchised by we the people. Why do we allow that? There's no cable channel on working people. No cable channel on the students of America. Millions and millions of them don't have a cable channel. Teenagers don't have a cable channel. All they're exposed to are these stupid advertisements to make them eat junk food and drink junk drink and participate in violent programming through interactive technology. You've got to raise the demand here. We own the public airways. Who controls the public airways? The radio and TV commercial stations. Who get licenses? From who? From the Federal Communications Commission. What do they pay for their license? Nothing. We give away our property. It's called the commons. The public airways, free. Why aren't we alert? We're the landlords. The radio and TV stations are the tenants. Look at the junk they give us 24 hours a day. Look at Saturday afternoon, if you can bear it, on ABC, NBC, Fox, CNN. It's like nothing else is going on in America but rerun movies and sports and some people flipping bicycles and infomercials telling you how you can buy kitchen appliances that are sharp as heck. You've got to raise your expectation level. I grew up corporate. You're growing up corporate even double. We have to grow up civic. Those are the important values, civic values. Health, safety, respect for our descendants, opportunity, non-discrimination. These are civic values. Corporate values are commercial. Every major religion in the world warned its adherents, do not give too much power to the merchant class. You know that from your readings. So raise your expectation level. The other thing I want to convey to you is change your courses in high school so you learn more from physics, biology, chemistry, and government. It's simple. Don't you have labs in high school? Okay. What are you learning? Learning how to run a computer? Are you learning how to test drinking water, local drinking water in your community? For heavy metals, cadmium, arsenic, lead. If the high school in Flint was doing that, they would have discovered the contamination of thousands of kids and adults in Flint with high lead levels in Michigan. What else can you use your chemistry and biology, physics courses for? You can learn how to test soil samples, contaminated soil nutrients. All kinds of things you can do. So you get out of high school, you don't just have a bunch of formula and equations and kind of silly little experiments. You have practical knowledge that make you a strong, informed citizen. So you got a head start. In the government courses, whatever you call them now, do you learn any civic skills? You learn how to use the Freedom of Information Act of every state that you come from and the federal government? It only takes a day or two to do that. We have it in our high school in Connecticut. That information is the currency of democracy. You want to get test results from EPA, you want to get meat and poultry contamination reports from another agency, you got a right to ask for it too. So that they're educating you to be strong, informed, persistent citizens who can change the country and the world, instead of picking up magazines and say, oh, the Oculus Rift, it's going to change everything. It's going to shred your brain. This cell phone, if it's used in a trivial manner, is your parents, your aunts and uncles. You need to speak more for grown-ups. You will totally impress them. They are factually deprived in terms of environmental issues, most of them. You will very much impress them. You will get the most out of them. Just think of the regular talk you have in your family. How much of it is small talk, silly talk, nasty talk? What are you doing? I mean, you got kids now, they're waking up, they're 8 years old, and they text message their parents in the kitchen telling them what they don't want to eat for breakfast. And it's only going to get worse. So you've got to cut that connection to that addictive technology if you're going to face real life instead of virtual reality. Let me end on this issue. Emphasize civic skills in your high school class, and there's a lot of great material. There are pamphlets and how-tos on how to put on a press conference, how to dig into City Hall, how to hold your legislator accountable. On and on. It's all there for you, free, for the asking. And I'd like to end by saying we started a whole movement called the Student Public Interest Research Group. And WYSE is the national group. These are college university students who assess themselves or get student budgets, student government budgets. They have their own nonprofit group. They hire people in their 20s and 30s, lawyers, engineers, writers, mobilizers, organizers, you name it. And they tackle problems in their state. So you have New York PIRG, Mass PIRG, Michigan PIRGM, you have California PIRG. They're in about 20 states. They canvass door to door, millions of homes every year. They work with the Clean Water Action Group and other groups. How many of you heard of the student PIRGs? P-I-R-G. See, look around. See, you're in the internet age. They're all over the internet. Doesn't matter. You're not looking for it. You're not going to find it, even if it's all over the internet, free. Doesn't matter. And when you go to uspirg.org, uspirg.org, they'll lead you to a major environmental group that the college students funded and work with, and some of them get course credit by their teachers for doing these things. Last point is, anybody who tells you facts, ask them what their evidence is, especially now in a Trump age, right? I mean, we've always had, we have to ask the question now, what's the future of truth? And it didn't start with Trump. It's been going on for centuries, but it's just getting more rapid, more insistent, more by the minute. And so they throw around a lot of figures. And so you're entitled to say, what's your evidence? Please tell me your evidence. And when someone says to you, oh, we're going to have to invade this country or attack this country or do things in our country with the force of the government, you simply say, what's your legal authority? Just tell me, what's your legal authority for invading Iraq? Did you obey the Constitution to declare war? No. Are you violating international statutes like the Geneva Convention? Yes. So you want to do that, and above all, organize yourselves now. Do not have people tell you, get prepared, get prepared, get prepared. You're prepared now to get underway. And if you want 7 minutes of agitation a week free, you can get my column. Just go to nader.org and you will, and you will get different vistas than what you'll get by reading normal newspapers, magazines, or in your classes. I want to emphasize this little book. It has a citizen summons where you can summon your senators and representatives. You, not your parents. You can summon your citizens, your representatives and senators. If you get 500 names on a petition, you'll get a congressperson. If you get 700 names, you'll get a senator. So few people show up anymore in town meetings that you'll floor them. You'll totally, overwhelm them, and you'll get a senator. And once you got a senator in the room, once you got a congressperson in the room with everything that's on your mind, I'll leave them in your care. Thank you.